It says we're live streaming.
There we
Yo,
go.
Marty, who's wearing the merch better, me or Brady?
I think you're both wearing it equally as well. I obviously am not.
How very diplomatic of you, man. All right. So how's it going, guys? Welcome to Swan Signal Live. This is our third edition. We've got Marty Bent, Connor Brown as our special guest today, Swan founder Cory Klippsten, Swan creative director Brecky von Bitcoin in the house. So yeah, we have a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. Connor just dropped a piece, which is fantastic. Obviously, we'll be linking to it if you haven't read it yet. We're definitely going to get into that. We've got Marty here, which means we're going to get into his pet peeve, and Connor gets into it as well in his piece, his pet peeve FUD, which is obviously energy usage. We're going to get into that, and we'll talk about the Bitcoin future. So let's get started, guys. Connor, let's talk a bit about your piece, kind of set the scene for us. It is, a great piece of research, history, kind of digging into American history, making lots of parallels between, the near future with Bitcoin and, 1800s periods of American history that might play out similarly to that. So, yeah, why don't you jump in and tell us a little bit about what you found out in your research?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of took the perspective of looking at the national security implications of Bitcoin. I think it's something that hasn't really been dealt with very well so far, or at least just no one's really put much time into it. So I wanted to really figure out, how could I look at Bitcoin from an America first perspective? And where we are right now, which is what everyone knows, we're at unprecedented levels of debt. We're at debt in all different sectors of the economy. So we have, government debt, municipal debt. We have corporate debt that's off the charts. And this sort of over-indebtedness magnified by the current crisis we're facing can't really be solved by just going deeper into debt. And I kind of looked at a previous point in history, which is the gold rush, where we had a similar financial crisis in 1837 that was from, massive amounts of over-indebtedness and lots of speculation and overconsumption. And, the gold rush was this amazing financial miracle of sorts that brought us out of that period of financial distress and was a form of stimulus, but it was a stimulus that was external in nature, which is very important because that way we're not getting to the snake eating its own tail problem, but we can actually have an outside force that generates prosperity. And, that gold rush was an initial burst of stimulus that then led the way for generating massive returns in building out our transportation infrastructure and other forms of new developments in the economy. And then, Bitcoin amazingly represents a very similar situation where we have our energy sector that could possibly see a similar, innovation or renaissance period from Bitcoin, because Bitcoin gives us this sort of external stimulus. We can become extremely profitable because we can take all this wasted energy that's literally going to nothing right now. And in my piece, I detail exactly how much energy we're wasting. It's like 2/3 of all electricity generated. And that can just go straight to mining Bitcoins and kind of, making our energy grid more efficient. And so that's kind of the overall thrust of the article is with that, we can sort of rescue our economy from an outside outside stimulus versus some sort of deeper debt cycle.
That's crazy, man. I had no idea about the amount of energy waste. Brecky found a tweet. You want to drop that tweet, Brecky, that you found from, I think it was McHenry. Is that right? It was one of the congressmen, anti-Bitcoin congressmen. And he was...
No, he's not anti-Bitcoin. He's pro-Bitcoin.
Oh, he's pro-Bitcoin. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we like him. He's good.
McHenry, yeah, of course he is.
Yeah, but hold on, I'm going to drop it into this little chat here.
I'm going to just read it out.
But yeah, sure. I saw it this morning. It says, McAdenville is living up to its nickname of Christmas Town, USA by lighting up Christmas trees to spread some cheer during this time of national uncertainty. And while I actually think that's a good thing, it just kind of bothers me that, let's just waste some energy to make everyone happy, but Bitcoin, that's bad. So I don't know. I thought it was a nice little place to talk about how we spend our energy and what's worth it, and are we allowed to say how people can spend their energy? Marty, I feel like you got a couple things to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's People have double standards, and that's because I think most people just don't understand Bitcoin. They see that it consumes energy, and they think that energy consumption in and of itself is bad because of all the climate crisis stuff, and then two, if they don't see that Bitcoin has value, they think that energy consumption is a waste. And as Bitcoiners, as you come to understand Bitcoin, you understand that one, most of the energy being used is renewable or energy that would otherwise be wasted, and then two, that Bitcoin is a pretty good thing for society overall. So, I mean, it just comes with the learning curve.
I think it's got to be like number one FUD right up there. It's the one that I hear from friends all the time, acquaintances that come in. I think it's because the mainstream media loves it so much, and it's like the first thing they talk about, boiling the oceans and using up all the energy on the planet. What I love though is when you can like incept the idea that, hey, Bitcoin actually helps us move toward green energy and incentivize the development of cheaper energy, more efficient energy. And Connor, this is one of those lines that gets dropped, and it's like just the perfect summation. You had it as a header in one of the sections of your piece. I'm surprised like it hasn't been said or written yet, but I haven't seen it. Bitcoin does not waste energy; it consumes energy waste. Beautiful line there, man. That's going to get used a lot, I think. It's a meme that's just been born there, and it's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's really something beautiful about Bitcoin, like energy conservation, and I think that's kind of how we can spin it. Is previous attempts to solve the climate crisis, if you will, is really a defeatist attitude of like, well, the only thing we can do is just reduce consumption, which is kind of like giving up before you even start. I mean, practically speaking, with a growing population of billions, I mean, come on, are we really going to be able to reduce global energy consumption as all these people are desperately wanting to improve their quality of life? No, definitely not. So we should take a practical conservation approach, which is we need to find the fastest way to make renewable energy profitable and get it to market. And that seems like Bitcoin is like the ultimate solution. And so we could, I like the idea of spinning it as like we're the real conservationist. We're not people that are just LARPing and not actually doing anything practical.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bitcoin fixes this. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could also even argue like to, people who are in the crypto, quote unquote, crypto space. We know it's the Bitcoin space, but the people I'm talking about will call it the crypto space. You could argue that, hey, your projects, your proof of work mining projects are a waste of energy, because there's one sound money, and you're, trying to compete against it is actually just a waste. So, you should probably give up and start using Bitcoin for that reason as well.
I mean, we can say that, but then I think that makes us a little hypocritical. If they want to, if that's what they believe in and that's where they think the best use of their energy is, then, that's on them and the markets will prove them wrong. But until then.
I mean, I don't know. I have no problem calling them out.
I'm just playing shitcoiners advocate here. All right.
It's nice of you. It's nice of you, Becky.
I was going to say, and to add to this line of thinking, like we're talking about renewable energy, and it cites the exploration and innovation around renewable energy, and then what Connor said, being conservationist too. Yes, we do consume a lot of oil, and the production of oil is very dirty at the end of the day, mainly because of the gas waste that's created on these oil fields. So there, it actually helps us become more efficient and cleaner, like with the dirty energy as well, the quote unquote dirty energy. So a company I work for outside of the podcast and newsletter, that's what we're doing. We're using waste gas on an oil field. We're capturing that, and the problem they have with this waste gas is it's not economical to build the pipelines that transfer this gas to cities. It doesn't make sense. It's very expensive. So what Bitcoin mining provides is the opportunity to, instead of having to build pipelines that are hundreds of miles long, you can build a pipeline that's feet long. It goes from where the oil is extracted to a generator that hooks up to a container where Bitcoin is being mined. And that in and of itself is incredibly more efficient and cleaner with the dirty energy. Because if you were most of that gas just gets vented or flared, and vent is very bad for the atmosphere, and that is just like 40 to 50 times worse from a methane emissions point of view. And then flaring is less bad, but you're just literally lighting energy on fire that could have been used for something else. And so Bitcoin mining particularly, creating incentives to be more efficient and cleaner with dirty energy as well. And I think this is actually a long-term Trojan horse. A lot of people talk about Coin Center, and there's a new HODL pack that are going to defend Bitcoin on Capitol Hill. But I think as soon as the oil and gas companies really get their minds around the benefits that Bitcoin provides for them, they'll be fighting for Bitcoin on Capitol Hill as well. And they're pretty big lobbies, even though we're pretty anti-state here. It is, again, a Trojan horse for Bitcoin to be sort of defended by other industries. And then one last thing on that, forget what I was going to say. That's all I'll say at this point.
Can we maybe get into a little bit of how, and I think Marty and Connor, you obviously both have something to add to this, how Bitcoin is good for America? Like, why is it a national security issue? And maybe go into it in the basics for people who haven't read the article, don't listen to Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of highlighted, so the way I looked at it is I looked through the National Security Strategy, which was published in 2017, which is basically highlighting our current military objectives and making America a more secure and safer place. And there were a few different important objectives that stood out to me that where Bitcoin especially shined. The first is in rejuvenating the domestic economy. And, that one's pretty, so the argument for that one is that, and there's some really fantastic research on this, that as you increase energy efficiency, you're actually creating one of the greatest stimulants to economic growth. And, a study looking at multiple different developed economies over several hundred years found that almost every single burst of economic growth was directly correlated with a previous increase in energy efficiency. And essentially what you commonly know about Jevons paradox, which is that if more energy is produced, then it's just consumed. And it's typically something from, conservationist types that say, we shouldn't focus on energy efficiency. But on the flip side, what that does mean is that Jevons paradox is kind of the key to unlocking economic growth. And that I kind of extrapolated that in my article as saying, well, then if Bitcoin can massively increase our energy efficiency, make energy companies much more profitable, and overall decrease the cost of energy for America, then we can have a couple major benefits. We can see an improved manufacturing sector, and we can make our manufacturing more competitive. We can see foreign inflows for people trying to capture those sorts of benefits of having America as this sort of new energy dominating sector. And then I think there's also just the idea that if we do transform into an economy that prioritizes energy abundance and kind of get out of the idea that energy is some scarce resource, then all bets are off in terms of what's possible economically speaking. And then there's also the energy independence aspect, which is also pretty important, and that's really been highlighted by the recent developments with OPEC Plus, which Marty had Kyle Bass on his podcast, and they went over how devastating the last few weeks have been for the oil and natural gas industry. But essentially, our economy runs on oil, and if we are and other fossil fuels, and if we are to be reliant on other countries for importing that, then they can just cut us off at any point, and we could, not only be victim to intentional attacks or disruptions in supply lines from them, but even unintentional stuff like natural disasters or terrorist attacks or things like that. All of that is just a place we don't want to be economically, and so transforming to a Bitcoin economy or a Bitcoin energy grid could really change the way that we see energy independence, could make our energy sector much more competitive, and could overall give us a more anti-fragile economy. I think it would be from a shift away from fossil fuels and much more on renewable generation and electricity-based economy. But all of that is major for U.S. national security objectives and making sure that our country stays robust.
I'm going to chime in with an argument that I see all over the mainstream press and on Twitter right now, basically saying that the Saudis, because most of their economy and like supporting all their populace or whatever basically runs on oil, they say that they actually need a price in say like $50, $60 range. And it's actually just plain false, because they have so much money in reserve that they can afford to have oil in the teens or 20s for like 8 to 10 years.
Wow.
So that is not something that you should be looking for to save the shale industry or save the US oil industry, even though that's kind of what's being trumpeted out there to keep these companies alive, essentially just trying to be able to roll over their loans, because they're the most leveraged basically companies in the US economy. It's like 11% of this scary tranche of triple B loans that are waiting to get downgraded. And they're just trying to like spin this narrative through all the hedge fund managers and the talking heads on CNBC that the Saudis can't hold out for long. And it's just bullshit. They can hold out way long enough to basically just wash out every US oil producer that's over $30.
Wow. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. And it also goes to the nature of central banking, which is basically we've financialized our energy sector based on artificially low interest rates. And now we have an extremely fragile energy sector that, is based on producing oil at rates that they couldn't possibly come close to break even now. So who knows how this all plays out.
I remember
I'm going to read a question. Go ahead, Marty. And then I've got a question from the chat rooms for you.
I was going to say, I remember I worked at a valuations firm doing mid-market portfolios a few years back. And I remember looking at some oil companies that were taking out pretty big PIK loans, and they're highly dependent on oil prices being around $80 to $100. So there is going to be massive consolidation within the US shale industry, but there are companies that have been better than others and have better balance sheets and cash flows. But yeah, Saudis can outlast pretty much anybody in the world when it comes to oil production. And that's why, again, Bitcoin as a potential externality to make some extra revenue on the side of your oil production just by using the waste gas is a no-brainer in my opinion.
So here's the question. This is actually from Phil, Mr. Sue, the podcaster down in Austin, for Marty. With oil being so influential to political interests and crony capitalism, do you think the statists could actually take off with Bitcoin instead of digital dollars, because pairing Bitcoin with oil is lucrative and beneficial? So could you tie those interests together around Bitcoin, and like what kind of time frame could that be possible in, and what steps would we have to take to make something like that actually happen? Are the incentives actually built in for that to happen?
Yeah, I think the incentives are there. And I think Connor explained a good amount of it in his rant a couple minutes ago. And just to add to that, I would say, why is Bitcoin important in national security? And it's the classic jurisdictional arbitrage argument that comes into play and has come into play throughout Bitcoin's history. If we're not going to basically build an economy with Bitcoin embedded in it, somebody else is going to do it. And if they do that, they are going to succeed. We will be left in the dust. And like you just mentioned, the game theory makes it so that we are highly incentivized to prioritize that. And yes, I do think the incentives between the externalities provided by the oil and gas industry and renewable energy industry as well, with Bitcoin mining, just make more. I mean, I don't think a government could implement, like, they'll call it a cryptocurrency, but it's not. It's centralized. Like it's. I'm not worried about the USDC or whatever it's called at all, because it's inherently not what Bitcoin is, and Bitcoin is a better product at the end of the day. Yes, they'll try, but it's not going to work. It's not what Bitcoin is. It's not distributed. It's completely centralized. So it's all talk.
One thing that concerns me is that the US, I could see a scenario where the US is kind of the last to really hop on the Bitcoin bandwagon, the Bitcoin train in the world, because we do have the, world reserve currency, and there's a lot of power that comes along with that and a lot of incentive to maintain that power. So hanging on as long as possible to trying to save the US dollar might be the route that the US decides to take. And that would leave the door open for a lot of other countries to come in and kind of come to power in the US or in the world.
Well, that's another sort of game theoretical situation that comes into play here. Like if the US dollar is on its last leg and in its death throes here, the options laid before our government are, okay, if we are going to lose reserve status regardless, just because of the folly of our ways over the last 30 years, do we want the yuan, which is controlled by China, to be the reserve currency, or do we want Bitcoin, which is controlled by nobody, to be reserve currency, or the currency, the settlement currency that we use? And game theoretically, I think Bitcoin just makes more sense, and you're more likely, I mean, it's more advantageous to adopt the Bitcoin standard than succumb to the yuan standard.
I also think it's not necessarily a direct trade-off. You can still have the reserve currency and at the same time realize you have limited runway and realize you have to make some sort of alternative move. And so, I mean, then you could get into like deeper theoretical stuff, but you could be like, the US should take a significant speculative bet on Bitcoin while having reserve currency status. And then at the same time, you also have to think that the US doesn't necessarily benefit from a strong dollar or having the reserve currency necessarily, because then we have to pay our debts in those dollars as well. And so a strong dollar policy could really suffocate the United States. If we need dollars to finance our national security apparatus and the dollar keeps appreciating or strengthening against other fiat currencies, then we're in a really tough spot where suddenly we need a lot more money than we thought we did because the USD has appreciated, which is happening right now. And that's kind of like what we're seeing in real time is as the entire world rushes for dollars and we have this liquidity crunch, despite trillions and trillions of different sorts of injections and stimulus, we're still seeing additional dollar strengthening, which is really unsettling for a lot of the, top people at central banks and things like that. So, it's going to be wild going into it. But I think all of this uncertainty and instability highlights that you need some sort of outside unit of account and store of value that can sort of alleviate the sort of never-ending crisis.
Yeah, we have a question that's related to this. This is a good time to drop it from Rod in the Telegram chat room. What impact do you think the economic stimulus that was just announced, I think it was last night, will have on public awareness of Bitcoin? And Connor or Marty or both can answer that.
I mean, I think it's already starting to have an impact just because the money printing memes are starting to like become big. And, if we get to that point where people start really, it begins with memes and then it becomes a real full-blown conversation. I don't think we have any idea how extreme the political consequences of this are going to be. And I think Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are going to be very tame compared to what the eventual outcome is. And if people really do begin to believe, especially on the left, that you can just infinitely print money, we don't need to pay taxes, we don't need to do anything besides get our welfare check because we have a money printer that goes burr, then we're looking at a really weird situation. And Bitcoin, I think, would be kind of the natural answer. And sort of like all these people that we've talked to, I know so many people I've spoken to over the years that have been interested or that I've kind of ranted to about Bitcoin, and they've been sort of like, oh yeah, okay. Now suddenly it's like starting to click. The seeds have been planted, and then all those people are like, wait a second, what if they're onto something? And we'll see how much $6 trillion of stimulus will do.
Marty, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think people, I mean, my personal text DM indicators have been going off. It's just anecdotally, and I've had more people approach me about Bitcoin recently. And then, this is why Bitcoin was created. Chancellor on brink of second bailout of the banks. This is the environment Bitcoin was created for. And it's like Connor mentioned, as soon as you have people reducing a complex monetary theory to a meme burr, like the powers that be have lost all control and credibility. And so so speaking particularly to the stimulus, like it's probably not even going to be enough. Luke Roman was on was on the Macro Voices podcast 2 days ago, I believe. And basically what we're doing is funding the euro dollar banking system. And if we really need to prop up the economy and all the debt that we've accrued, the Fed's probably going to need to buy something like, or buy debt and print money to the tune of like 40, I believe it was 45 to 47 trillion. That's like not even, it's not even like 20% of what they may actually need to do with what they announced, with the stimulus that was announced yesterday. And then on top of that, we're in a really weird situation here. I had Chuck Marone from the Strong Towns podcast on Tales from the Crypt last week, and he brought up a very interesting point comparing the predicament we find ourselves in to the Weimar Republic and what sort of led to their hyperinflationary system, where they had an economic downturn, and they had like this predicament, like, do we save the economy and print a bunch of money and keep people working? And like, how do we're in a very similar predicament. And I think the numbers that have just come out in the last few weeks alone, if it started in September with $50 billion overnight repo injections, it got to 75, then 150 billion, 500 billion, and $1 trillion. And then you had the Fed coming out talking, or not the Fed, the House of Representatives coming out talking about minting the $1 trillion platinum coins. And then you have a $6 trillion stimulus package that comes out. And if that's not enough, these numbers are just going to get higher. And yeah, it's just going to naturally force people to question, like, what the fuck is going on here? And what are the alternatives to the system? And Bitcoin just lies in the wake. Like, hey, I'm here.
I want to chime in because there is another possibility that it seems like a lot of the macro people are talking about. And, the next guest that Eric Townsend had on, and, he's been talking about like a new Bretton Woods that goes back to gold, which, as we all know, is something that safety and has talked about as a potential eventuality, and not necessarily one that Bitcoiners should be scared of. Like, at least we'd be going toward a hard asset, and it'd be all this tortured stuff. And, at least we'd get rid of fiat, and then Bitcoin would be in open competition with gold. But what do you guys think about a future where there's some kind of accord where we move from dollars onto some kind of like, special depository receipt that's backed by gold in some way, and they jack up the price of gold to $100,000 an ounce or something like that, and try to jam this thing back together for another couple decades?
I could see something like that happening. I can see the attempt happening. I don't know. I go back and forth. I do think that right now, it's separate from the gold reserve currency issue, we're seeing problems in the gold markets themselves, where the physical is decoupling from the paper gold, which could be a really crazy scenario and like be the perfect demonstration of why Bitcoin is important to have a teleporting bearer asset. Because, if we're seeing physical gold where from what I'm hearing, you can't get it basically anywhere. Mm-hmm. That it's so sold out you can't even take an order on it in months because people like literally don't know how they're going to get it. If
just
that
chiming
starts,
in with a news piece, yeah, ABN AMRO yesterday just announced they're no longer selling gold and silver, and if you don't sell yours through them in the next week or something, they'll liquidate it for you and put the fiat in your account.
Yeah, and they're like a massive like precious metals seller. So
not your gold, not your gold.
Exactly. So I wonder, if that happens, I feel like the credibility of any sort of new financial system based on gold, where you have to hope that someone holds it, is basically dead on arrival. If those rumblings turn out to be something real, I could see another situation where you have some sort of Bretton Woods 2.0 that's based on like essentially what Libra was trying to be, but something like the SDR, the special drawing rights, which is like a basket of fiat currencies. Which technically exists right now, but doesn't really have much traction. So I could see somehow trying to put everything back together, but I feel like the overwhelming public sentiment absolute distrust of any of these economic leaders.
We got issues with your audio, Connor. Headphones came unplugged maybe. I'll mute. Marty, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I've actually been talking about this with Matt on the podcast and a rabbit hole recap. Like, I could definitely, if things go terribly wrong for U.S. dollar as the reserve currency quicker than expected, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a stopgap, quasi gold standard. Let's be real. Bitcoin at the protocol level we still need help scaling and all that stuff. And it's I think it right where it is now, or its price is now compared to the development pace is very good. But bringing the whole world onto a Bitcoin standard right now probably this isn't practical without a lot of centralization via Bitcoin banks and stuff like that. But who knows? Like Connor said, there is this perfect storm, sort of, and I wrote about it today. It's gathering where the paper gold markets are decoupling, and like Connor said, if they actually fuck up that backstop and it sort of gets bastardized as all this is going down, people are like, what the hell, how can we trust that? And the physical nature of gold is its biggest weakness. They're still going to be hoarded in centralized vaults, and I do think people have been planning for a transition to a quasi new gold standard. Russia and China specifically have been accumulating massive amounts of gold for the last 2 decades, and what seems to me to be a positioning before a transition away from the dollar. In Russia last month, doubled the amount of gold it bought from January to February, while people were expecting them to sort of not buy any gold in February. So yes,
that was hilarious. They told people we're not buying any gold in February and then picked up 400,000 ounces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's amazing.
Marty, you almost said hoarding there. Nice call. Hoarding scarce assets is a good thing, my friend. I learned that from you.
It is. Holding.
Connor, you're back. I think
I go back.
Good to go.
Yeah, can you hear me better now?
I go back and forth though.
I have a question for Connor. If is your audio working? Let's test it.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Yeah. So what if the third one is it's too early for Bitcoin because we're like, 0.05% of the globe, and the gold thing doesn't happen because you can't get 180 nations to, collaborate because it's not, World War II didn't just end. And so the third one is we do just kick this thing down the road one more time, one last hurrah, one last party, and this isn't it. And I will tell you, I'm in, BTC Nation and a bunch of other groups that are like more broad based as some of you guys are. And, they don't think the party's over. They, I'm in a group with the, traders, bunch of traders that trade S&P and oil and all this other stuff. And they don't think it's over. They think we're going to go through this and just like cycle back up to all time high with all this, printed cash and just patch it together somehow, some way with dollars. Dollar milkshake, be damned.
I think that's probably the most likely scenario, but right? I don't think that, I think the attempt to patch together will happen. I think that it will lead to probably medium-term inflation. I think is probably what happens, is that people think that this sugar high can last and that it's going to fix everything. But I think that, and this is actually the scenario I hope for as well, because I don't feel like Bitcoin, I feel like we can get better. I feel like we can improve the infrastructure. We can get onboarding better. I just feel like right now, I can't even imagine if there was some like sudden rush for Bitcoin, how crazy things could get. I feel like in a few years, Bitcoin will shine even more if the demand peaks then. And I would really like them to try to like stick it all back together, because I don't think the inflation will be immediate either. I mean, I do think they're going to do whatever it takes. And I think the whole world right now is kind of looking at the US to fix it. So I think they're going to try to do that.
I think they're going to try, but that's been my biggest worry is that everybody and their mother is convinced that the Fed's going to print money, stimulus is going to come, and things are going to go back to normal. We're going to kick it down the road, and just heuristically, it scares the shit out of me. And then they can try as much as they want to pump money into the economy, but depending on when people go back to work because of this virus, you can print and give people as much money as you want, but the economy is ground to a halt now. And the nature of our system is such that it depends on constant consumer consumption, growth, and we may have a virus really fucking that up right now. And no amount of money printing or stimulus can really put that genie back in the bottle, and the system may just collapse on itself because of an externality it did not foresee, because of a black swan it didn't see.
So yeah, it would be interesting. Like, what are the chances that we actually get some, big mainstream politicians to, actually start looking at Bitcoin, some people with like a big voice? Brecky, do you have anything? I feel like you have a video. You want to play that video?
Well, it's funny you say that. So we at Swan, we're very focused on kind of bringing Bitcoin to America. And we really want to kind of push this narrative, especially, with all the elections coming up. So we got somebody on our team, and we wanted to share a little preview of some of the things he's going to be doing for us. So we just wanted to get your reactions. This is just one video. It's a preview, hopefully a lot more to come, but anything else to add, Cory?
Roll tape. I'm excited to see what he
My
has to
fellow
say.
Americans, just like many of you, my family and I are social distancing. And it's important that everyone take this seriously so that we can beat this thing. And Joe, if you're watching this, 6 foot distance from everyone, buddy. Actually, that's probably a good rule for you to follow at all times. But anyway, Michelle and I are doing fine. But we did just run out of good shows to watch on Netflix. I gotta tell you though, I just started reading up on this whole Bitcoin thing, and boy oh boy, I think I'm falling down the, what do you Bitcoiners call it? Falling down the rabbit hole. As Michelle and I waited 3 hours just to get inside Costco, we ran into this gentleman who did a hell of a job pitching Bitcoin to us. Jameson Lopp was his name, a real stand-up guy. And he has a great website full of resources. I'm learning so much. I just listened to the Audible of the Bitcoin Standard from Safety and the Moose, and I just started Jan Pritzker's book, Inventing Bitcoin. Michelle, if you're ordering more supplies, you better be checking on deals on Lolly and Fold. We need to be stacking sats. Yes, whatever we can, damn it. Stacking sats, right? Am I saying that right? Sup, freaks. Anyway, folks, I just thought I'd share with you what I'm learning. But basically, in the words of the great Murray Rothbard, what has the government done to our money? The more I learn about how we've screwed up the money, the more obvious it is to me that Bitcoin fixes this. There are just so many misconceptions about Bitcoin. But America, I've decided it's time I help clear up those misconceptions. For example, I used to think Bitcoin wasted all this energy. But today, I heard this real all-American guy from Philly. His name's Marty Bent. He's got this podcast, and I heard him explain perfectly and rationally how Bitcoin is actually good for the environment. Heck, it's the real new Green Deal. I don't know about you, America, but I'm a believer in this Bitcoin thing. Might be a good idea for me to get some in case this thing catches on. Well, folks, my fellow citizens, I'm going to continue doing my own research, but stay safe and stay tuned. Michelle, did my VR headset arrive? I need it for Udi's VR Bitcoin meetup. What? Normally you can't borrow it. This Bitcoin thing's important. How many times I gotta tell you?
What do we think of our new spokesman, folks?
Barry's looking a little fat.
That's all you gotta say, Marty?
No, I thought it was great. I'm flattered. He made a lot of great points. It was we did fuck up the money. We need to fix it. That's the biggest question on my mind, is like, how the hell do we transition to a Bitcoin standard in an orderly fashion? Does it happen orderly? Does it happen at a slow pace over the course of decades? Are we really just at the very, very beginning of this, and we are just pushing the ball forward for our children and grandchildren?
I mean, that's the scary part is with everything happening because of coronavirus. Like, whether we like it or not, it might push up the schedule of hyper Bitcoinization by a lot. And we're just gonna have to, I hate to quote him again, but Antonopoulos would always talk about this, how the infrastructure isn't ready and then it catches up, and we're just gonna have to catch up and make sure it is ready.
Yeah, all the devs scare the shit out of me about this. You talk to any the core devs, and they're like, it's not ready. But
yeah,
I mean, it'll never be ready.
Yeah, that's going to be their answer forever.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And Matt Corallo did increase his Bitcoin success rate significantly over the last 2 years. So that gives me a little bit of hope.
Yeah, that was
and
very bullish.
Yeah, and Connor, it's funny you mentioned Jevons paradox in your most recent piece, and we talked about it earlier. And I think there's actually a compounding Jevons paradox with Bitcoin as well, as Bitcoin makes energy efficiency better, driving the more economical use of that energy. There's also a Jevons paradox happening at Bitcoin on Bitcoin too with UTXOs. So UTXOs would be, in my opinion, analogous to gas or oil. And as they become more efficient, as the things that you can do with UTXOs get more robust, as we get things like Schnorr signatures, you get hopefully eventually cross signature aggregation and stuff like that, the utility and efficiencies that UTXOs provides increases, which will hopefully drive adoption and usage of Bitcoin as well. So hopefully we get things like BIP Taproot and cross sig aggregation in the protocol relatively soon, because that will just drive what you can do with UTXOs and the efficiency of those UTXOs overall as well. So I think the upgrades are on the roadmap. Sorry for saying roadmap. The upgrades are on the table that will make it possible for Bitcoin to basically take on the masses. But yeah, like you said, Brecky, Antonopoulos' quote of it's probably the tech will catch up with the people who need to use it.
I do think there's a possible good outcome here where the masses kind of flood into Bitcoin, or we have like a big renewed interest in Bitcoin, and that also brings a lot of developers with it, and people who begin working on Bitcoin that previously didn't quite understand the use case, or were talented developers, but just it didn't quite click for them. And if we do start seeing serious instability in the United States, which seems all but inevitable at this point, then maybe we double the amount of people working on Lightning pretty quickly, or something like that, which could build us all out a lot faster. So who knows where this ends up for Bitcoin development. But I think any renewed interest in or like brand new interest in Bitcoin, or people taking it seriously, is going to be great for the protocol developing much faster than we've seen it in the previous years.
Yeah, and just everything around it, like you were saying, just to drive that home. I mean, if this thing goes above ATH again, I think you'll see 1,000% more people working on and around Bitcoin. There'll be competition in every aspect, Lightning wallets, and more devs available that are coming over with incredible skills. He'll be able to get up to speed on core development, very quickly, and be able to contribute. I mean, it will attract, as it always has in every bull cycle. So, it's always going to lag. The infrastructure is always going to be a little bit behind the bull run, and things will break, and we'll fix them. And we'll also find out who the weak players were very quickly.
Yeah, I feel like it's sorry. I feel like it's an order of magnitudes game now, right? Like on the fiat side, on the US dollar side, this time around, 11 years later, we're seeing, orders of magnitude more money being printed. Is this the one that breaks the camel's back, or do we have to do another order of magnitude? We're going to be talking about hundreds of trillions in 10 or 12 years instead of tens. And then same with Bitcoin, right? This past cycle in 2017, 2018 brought a lot of resources into the system and hired a lot more Bitcoiners, a lot more educators, a lot more devs, a lot more Bitcoin businesses being built. And this next run, like Cory said, I think will bring in another order of magnitude growth in the Bitcoin industry. And yeah, I think it's going to happen. I mean, we're going to hit all-time highs. So off to the races.
Yeah, and you have billions of people at this point around the world sitting at home bored, probably Googling a bunch of stuff, hopefully not all just watching the Tiger King and doing some research during the day.
Marty, what is this Tiger King thing? I haven't looked into it yet. Give me the breakdown.
It's pretty good trash TV on Netflix if you want to unplug at the end of the day after making a bunch of content. It's basically some dude in Oklahoma who runs a tiger resort. He calls himself the Tiger King, and he's insane. Joe Exotic.
We need to get one of our documentaries or Bitcoin documentaries on Netflix right now. But I think we need something better than what's out there.
We do. Maybe we should, break away from the depressing stuff for a little bit and kind of just talk about how we're doing. Where's everyone at? How's your toilet paper supplies? How's living in close quarters with friends and family for extended periods of time? How we doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Connor, you go first. Connor.
I'm doing good. I've been panicking about this since January, so we're fine. Bitcoin Twitter had me plugged in. The hilarious thing is, like, a lot of my grandparents, they're just like, do not care at all. Or, like, I'll be like, all right, I really don't think it's smart for you to go out. Just go ahead and get your groceries and plan to stay home for a little bit, Gramps. And he's like, I gotta go get some weed killer today. Gotta go to the store. And I'm like, that's not essential. He's like, you have not seen these weeds. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, it's funny. And, at first it was like a Democratic hoax, and now he's he's thinking it might be a Chinese bioweapon, which I could see that being more likely, but still, it's one of those things that, like, I saw this tweet the other day. It's like, the great downfall of boomers is that they don't believe anything until they see it on mainstream media. And it's so painfully true right now. And, I don't think people are taking this seriously enough, especially in older generations where I'm from. And I don't know, it worries me, but at least my very immediate family is well prepared. So I'm feeling at least okay about that.
Connor, I was hoping for something less depressing here. Come on, man. Let's do something real quick, and then we can get back to it. I saw something on Twitter the other day or somewhere. We all apparently have quarantine nicknames, and your quarantine nickname is, what is it? How you're feeling right now, plus the last thing you ate out of your cupboard. So, like, I'm like, uncertain spaghetti-o. Brady, what are you?
I actually responded to this yesterday, so I'm just going to use the same one. I'm a bouncy tuna lettuce wrap.
Wait, do we all have to do this?
Yes, we all have to do it, and then we can go back to talking about Bitcoin.
I'm a confused egg.
Connor.
I guess I'm bullish peanut butter then.
Trepidatious banana.
Yeah. No, I think, like Connor, I started preparing early. I just had his son like a little over a month ago, and so I was freaking out pretty early too. And so we got out of New York. I'm just happy to be out of New York. I'm in a small town. It's pretty empty right now, by a beach, so able to take walks on the beach. I'm actually pretty comfortable right now. I'm just confused about the whole situation. And I think that, like you were saying, Connor, the older people you're around don't believe in this stuff until it's on the mainstream media. But, like, I don't know what to believe because of the mainstream media. Like, it's flashbacks to Ebola and all that stuff. Like the uncertainty around how many people are being tested and how long this has been going around. Like, how many people have actually gotten it and survived, or is there a statistics game being played? And I just naturally, as somebody who is very skeptical of the state, and I wrote about this last Friday, I'm just looking for the next Patriot Act, and I think they're going to try and use this to take away civil liberties. So it's like just keeping my guard up about that stuff and trying to be aware.
Yeah, I mean, that seems inevitable at this point. There's going to be some sort of, I can see it, like, you got a microchip in your arm that tests your, like, vaccination state or something. Who knows what could happen? I don't know. I don't. There's really not even a good way to put a spin on it. It's just sitting and watching it happen. I don't think it's intentionally malicious, but I don't think they're going to let anything go by without getting more civil liberties taken away. I think now we're kind of in this weird state where there's a couple different uncertainties. We don't know how many people have it. We don't know how severe it is. We don't know how many people have like asymptomatically got it and have already like built up antibodies that, and maybe we're just seeing the absolute worst of it now. And there's actually more people with it, which would be a good thing for herd immunity. I think now at the federal level, we're seeing panic from the Trump administration because they're beginning to realize just how absolutely devastating a lockdown is going to be for an economy that's essentially a spinning top on conspicuous consumption. And, I already know multiple friends have been laid off. Immediate family's been laid off. I was walking on a trail yesterday, just like going for a walk, and I heard 3 different people talking about being laid off. And one guy said he had just laid off 25 people. So like unemployment in like 1 week is going to be astronomical. And those jobs aren't just going to immediately bounce back. I mean, we're just supposedly at the beginning of this. And this is like a nuclear bomb dropped on an already extremely fragile economy. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what officials try to do, because I think they might realize how devastating this could be if they fully lock down.
Yep.
What do you guys think about not your paper, not your dollars? You guys withdrawing cash? Do we trust the FDIC? Because they came out and they did a video and they said, the cash is fine. Nothing to see here.
I mean, I'm not worried about that. They're just going to print more. Than Ben Bernanke came out last crisis. Like, we just changed the number in the computers. Like, you don't have to be worried about physical cash. Like, they can just create the money in the computer system. Your ATM may run out of cash temporarily, but you'll be able to use your debit card. I don't think that's going to go down.
Yeah, I agree.
What do we
And I think bank runs of year pass. I mean, that's just bank runs of year pass happened when there was banking gold standards too. So those bank runs are different than bank runs of today. And the 0% reserve requirement, it's basically been in place already. It's just, everything's levered to the gills. It doesn't, nothing really matters anymore in the bank. It's all confidence, it's a confidence game.
Both of you guys touched earlier on kind of this move from a deflationary period that's been going on for the last 2 to 3 decades, and how we probably, or at least may be, moving into an inflationary period. Can you carry that forward a little bit, Connor and Marty, and just talk about how that changes market structure and how asset prices move, and just like draw some implications there?
I think the biggest thing is like we're seeing the bond market behave very strangely relative to stocks, where we're seeing yields on bonds go up at the same time that stocks are going down, which means that the prices of both assets are falling simultaneously, which is very, very strange. And I think that's like the thing that's freaked out the Fed the most, is that they just cannot have bonds going down, because that means yields go up, which means that it costs more to service debt throughout all parts of the economy. And just the amount of blowups that could happen if we suddenly saw yields jump is crazy. But if we are headed into an inflationary world, then we should expect yields to rise, because yields have to compensate for the amount of inflation. So who knows how weird this thing can get. And I think the Federal Reserve is determined to do anything they can to keep yields low and keep this going. But at some point, I don't know. I have no idea how this plays out, because they could do even further unprecedented steps. They're already buying corporate bonds, which, just a few weeks ago, people were like, oh, they'd never do that. That's illegal. And then, a quick statement by the Treasury, and suddenly they're government guaranteed loans. And so it's okay to buy corporate bonds. It's hard to make any sort of predictions, because they don't care about the rules at this point. They just care about trying to keep it all together. And I have no idea how weird that can get. But generally speaking, yields up, inflation up is going to wreck a lot of people.
And why, either for you or Marty, like, why is it going to matter if bonds and stocks start moving in the same direction instead of opposite directions?
Yeah. So right now there's a really popular trade called the risk parity trade, where bonds and stocks move opposite of each other. So you want to sell your risky stocks and buy your safe bonds, and vice versa. And there's a lot of hedge funds that are just like levered up on this trade, and they make a lot of money based on just carrying out that trade on a very levered basis. So if that correlation breaks down for just a few days or weeks, then they could be facing major margin calls that sends further ripples throughout the system, that further creates these really wild moves in the markets. And I have no idea how that would unwind ultimately, but that's what everyone's worried about.
Is Bridgewater losing a rumored 20% in February an example of that?
Yeah, and that could also be a reason why gold's moving down as well, because Bridgewater has a large gold position. So maybe they're liquidating and pushing gold down. And I think that's ultimately what we saw in Bitcoin as well. We saw a massive liquidation candle, last Thursday or 2 Thursdays ago? But anyways,
March 12th, a day that
was,
shall live in infamy.
yeah, I mean, I think that was a bunch of hedge funds that were getting margin calls and needed dollars, and they were just liquidating their positions. And for such an early market, our market is just not ready for that large of a dump all at once. And so we just see a massive move downward. But the rate at which it was bought up is extremely exciting to me, because I mean, we're up at 6,000 now and we're still kicking. I think if we just like make it through this thing, then it's going to prove that Bitcoin really shines, and that it's not dying anytime soon.
Yeah, I think we definitely are seeing those hedge fund blowups behind the scene. I mean, we're not seeing them, but I think they're happening. That's what the Bank of International Settlements basically came out in November and said was the cause of the repo spasm in September, was the fact that levered hedge funds needed cash for their margin positions, and big banks, big primary dealers like JP Morgan specifically have rotated out of cash into the longer end of the curve, into bonds. And it's basically dried up funding for those margin positions. And that's why you see the Fed increasing their repo offerings. But what's interesting is that the banks aren't taking it because they don't want to lend. They're offering all this money, but a lot of the banks aren't even taking the money because they don't want to lend it to the hedge funds after that risk parity trade sort of broke. And yeah, in terms of like inflation, will be interesting this time around. Price inflation specifically, if we do QE with UBI, that'll be interesting, because first time around 08, we basically just did QE bailouts, and that inflation was quarantined to asset prices like equities and real estate. If you do UBI and start handing out $2,000 a month to people, I think that's when you would see the price inflation that people really worry about. Yeah,
I think that QE is kind of overhyped in terms of what it means for inflation. QE really is just taking inventory off dealers' balance sheets and putting on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. It doesn't really get into the actual monetary system, because it's not the reserves that QE are putting in are not lent out into the market. It's not the traditional fractional reserve account of banking where you take your deposits and then you lend them back out. That's not really how banking works anymore. And the reserves that the Federal Reserve is putting in through QE is not suddenly being lent out into the market. And the things that are being taken off are just treasuries, which are already relatively safe. What QE does is rebalance portfolios and causes people to, the real goal is just to move around the yield curve so that you can have lower rates of interest, and you can then, with lower rates of interest, stimulate new demand for debt. Now, the difference with that is that ultimately that doesn't lead to new lending, which means it doesn't lead to new money creation, aside from the small changes in interest rates. But if we suddenly just airdrop money on people and just do UBI, I mean, now we're talking about major amounts of money hitting the market. And that's where you could really see the inflation take off, is if people start depending on UBIs for any extended length of time, while everything shut down, while supplies are getting lower and lower because manufacturing's not there, then you're getting into sort of like the perfect storm for an inflationary scenario.
Well, we've been talking about this for years. Cory, do you want to finish up that topic before I kind of ask a closing question? We got about 10 minutes left.
I was just going to say, like, this was probably a Macro Voices thing, or maybe Preston on Nathaniel's show, I can't remember, over the weekend, but basically almost every retirement portfolio in the US, and I'm assuming it's probably pretty similar globally, is kind of like a mini version of this risk parity trade, in as much as, basically they're using stocks and bonds to hedge against each other. So it's that, classic 60-40 portfolio construction, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. If those start moving together, the prices of those start moving together, like just everybody's just straight wrecked, basically. Every pension fund, every person, it's all just only backstopped by money printing. And, I don't know. It's, don't listen to macro voices right before going to sleep. Let's just say that.
No, that's the scariest part. And that's why, like Connor said earlier, maybe I do hope they can paper over. I do hope they can paper over at least one more time. I don't know if they're going to be able to. Yeah. I mean, the pension money is
the Citadel. It's like, let's put names on it. The hedge funds that are backstopping this whole thing, that are requiring the Fed to step in and give them all of this money, are like Citadel and Millennium, right? So it's Mr. $240 million New York condo that needs all this money from the taxpayers and is stealing our savings.
Millennium 72, I believe, is another one.
Millennium
or 0.72.
Yeah, we should get Travis on to talk about that. That's his old shop, Kling.
Yeah, and I mean, then again, talking about perfect storms, like the demographic shift that we're about to experience here is massive, and all those people are going to want their retirement money, and it may not be there. So hopefully they can paper over it, just so we don't have complete societal collapse. Sorry to get depressing here.
I'll try to bring it around.
Bring it around, Brady. Bring it around.
I mean, all right. So we've been talking about this for years. Gold bugs before us, Austrians even longer. This is, maybe the crack up boom. Maybe this is virus is the gust that's toppled the top of the house of cards, and we're watching it fall right now. As we've been talking about this past hour, it's doom and gloom right now. Maybe we're in the midst of it, but we've got Bitcoin now. We have something different. This is maybe a way out, and we're built like Marty often alludes to, the kind of the metaphor of building the plane while it's crashing, right? So we've got Bitcoin devs and educators like trying to build a new engine for this thing as it's plummeting, and maybe we'll be able to pull up right before we crash in the mountainside. Let's play that out. Let's talk about how 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, how Bitcoin pulls us from crashing to the side of the mountain and kind of leads us into a Bitcoin renaissance.
Or how we're all in our citadels and the world is a terrible place. And
Brecky, you're the one that wanted to bring.
I know. I'm just. We should be real. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. But
I don't know. One thing I've experienced during this lockdown is I'm getting a lot closer to my family. My brother's down here. He starts a new job in 2 weeks. Luckily, he's still starting the job, and so he's been bunkered up with me, my wife, and our son, which has been incredible hanging out with him. And if there really is a collapse, I do think we'll see people depending on their families more and sort of turning away from the state. And then you'll have your Uncle Jim Bitcoiner who sort of educates everybody about Bitcoin and sort of picks up the pieces from there. And let's not forget, like, there are still assets that a lot of the companies that make up our country have. Yes, things may go bad. They may be debt burdened, but bankruptcy exists, and people can buy those assets on the cheap and rebuild from there. It's just whether or not we want to take that medicine quickly or slowly over time. And it may be bad initially at the end of the day, but we've been talking about this, like, anybody who's a sound money person is saying we need to take the Band-Aid off and take a punch and then rebuild from there. And it is going to hurt, but I think good positive externalities will come from it. And hopefully people depending more on their families and getting closer with their families will be one of those externalities, because we're just going to be forced to.
Yeah. I love the idea of Bitcoiners buying up all these distressed assets with their newfound riches and reallocating capital appropriately. So maybe that's something in 5 years from now we can start looking to make some good purchases. I think Bitstein jokes about like buying up like retired ships or something like that, and we can get some offshore fleet going on. But I think that I really, really like Strong Towns by Charles Marone that Marty was talking about earlier, because it's such, like, it's basically the guide to why our towns have been experiencing decline for the past 50, 60, 70 years because of this sort of growth Ponzi scheme we've got going on, and how to build new, vibrant, localized economies, walkable towns, and stronger relationships with the people around you, instead of, kind of being off in your own little neighborhood, nice picket fence bubble. And I think that that's a really, really good roadmap for what we go to from here. And I really hope that happens sooner rather than later, honestly, because I want to see it flourish in my lifetime. And I don't know. I think you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And I was expecting this to last for, like, who knows, 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know. I mean, by the way things were looking a few months ago, I was like, this is just going to keep going and going and going. And suddenly, like, the whole thesis just fell apart, like, overnight. And so I think that we'll be ready. I think the needs of the world are going to make us ready. And I do think that this can be, especially in America, a shift to a more favorable development pattern and living environment. And maybe it's more hyper localized and not based on our, national GDP numbers. And maybe the entire country kind of gets into more localized or state level government, which I would be a big fan of, because this has shown what an insane centralized mess it is at the top. So I think all of those things are really hopeful, and I think, do a lot of the important ideological changes that are necessary to kind of see through this Bitcoin vision that we have.
You're here, man. Preach. I love that. And that's what I see too happening in the future. And next, if this is the beginning of the Bitcoin Renaissance, and we're going to rely on Bitcoin to pick up the pieces, a decentralized money building a decentralized political system. I always think back to Michael Goldstein on the Citizen Bitcoin episode, and I kind of asked him a similar question, and he said that there would be thorium reactors dotting the world, and political, like, regions of political experimentation built around these thorium reactors that are mining Bitcoin. And you can just kind of go, like, from place to place, and, like, live how you want to live. And if you don't like how other sort of political enclaves are living, then you start your own, and people will kind of gravitate toward that. It's decentralized and free. I love that vision.
I can provide a little bit of Bitcoin cheerleading here. There were, like, really, really smart people that you could get into arguments with, 6 weeks ago, who would make arguments based on, long-term trends of demography or whatever. And, so this would be like a lot of the hedgies I talked to, or like a Tom Lee from Fundstrat or whatever. And they'd say, the reason there was a blip in the end of 2018 is because that was the peak spending year of Gen X or something like that. And the next big generation to move through the snake is the millennials, and their peak spending or peak consumption year will be 2038. So we're basically in a secular bull market for the next 18 years from now. And this, what has just happened, has completely put the lie to that thesis, or at least just proven, events prove that was wrong. And in doing so, what it did, regardless of near-term price action with Bitcoin, what it has done is pick any date and price target that you had 2 months ago for Bitcoin, literally just, before the end of January for Bitcoin. So if you thought it was going to be like, $100,000 in 2024, or you thought it was going to be $1 million in 2030, or whatever it is, you now have to pull that year forward or increase your number, because the expected value and the expected date at which you're going to hit that value both just moved in Bitcoin's favor significantly, because these things are conditional. And the condition on which that conditional is based has now just come to pass, which is like massive cracks and another blow up, and the one that we thought was going to happen. And it wasn't different this time. It never frickin' is with a fiat system. And now everybody knows that. So, I've never been motivated to, like, work harder, to recruit more people, to save more people on the Bitcoin lifeboat. Like, we are all here at the beginning of the Bitcoin Renaissance. It's more incumbent upon us than ever, to recruit people to the cause and get them building and get them working and get them buying, get them holding, get them figuring out how to spend, how to store, push these companies to do better and better, like fund companies that are doing interesting things and really just make this whole Bitcoin thing happen. And, I'm again, trepidatious is right. Like I'm both like horrified and scared about what's going on, but also giddily excited.
Ricky, closing words, and we'll wrap it up.
Buy some Bitcoin if you know what's good for you. Sign up for Swan and listen to Marty Bent and read Connor Brown. That's all I got.
Swan Signal out. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.